Before we begin, this story contains clinical descriptions of death by explosive decompression, including dismemberment, organ displacement, and the physiological effects of rapid pressure change on the human body. 5 people died. If that's something you need to step away from, we understand. Take care of yourself first. At 4 in the morning on November 5, 1983, on a drilling rig 230 kilometers northwest of Stavanger in the Norwegian North Sea, a human body was forced through a crescent-shaped opening 60 centimeters wide. The pressure behind it, 9 atmospheres, equalized to 1 in a fraction of a second. Internal organs were recovered from the deck. One fragment was found 10 meters above the pressure door. That opening was about the width of a manhole cover left ajar. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. This is the Unlit Room. New stories every week. And tonight, the North Sea, 1983. A drilling rig called the Byford Dolphin. 5 men, and the physics of what happens when the pressure disappears. The Frigg gas field sits in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, a stretch of water so hostile that the industry built platforms like small cities just to survive there. Frigg was discovered in 1971, operational from 1978. By 1983, the North Sea oil boom was the economic engine of Norway, and it ran on one thing above all: saturation diving. Here's how it works. At extreme depth, 80 meters, 90 meters, a diver's body saturates with inert gas from the breathing mixture. The gas dissolves into the blood, the fat, the tissue. At 9 atmospheres of pressure, the human body is a fundamentally different biochemical system. Every cell is holding gas in solution that would be instantly lethal at the surface, so you can't just come back up. Saturation divers live for days, sometimes weeks, inside pressurized chambers bolted to the deck of the rig. Cylindrical steel rooms barely tall enough to stand in, they breathe helium-oxygen mixtures, which makes their voices high-pitched and distorted. The Donald Duck effect, it's called. The air is thick, humid, warm. The only communication with the tenders on the outside is through a megaphone mounted to the chamber wall, competing with the constant noise of the rig and the sea. When it's time to work, they climb from the chamber through a connecting passage, a trunk, into a diving bell. The bell is lowered to depth. They work. The bell comes back. They climb out. The bell is disconnected. The routine continues. On the Byford Dolphin, the diving system dated from 1975. The rig itself was built by the Aker Group in 1974. A 108-meter semi-submersible, originally called the Deep Sea Driller. Operated by Dolphin Drilling, a subsidiary of Fred Olsen Energy. And on November 5, 1983, the diving crew had been working for more than 12 hours. It was 4 in the morning, deep into a shift that had started the day before. The North Sea in November, 230 kilometers from the nearest city. Darkness at 4 a.m. on a rig in open water, just the deck lights, the noise of the machinery, and the shift that never seemed to end. Inside the pressurized chambers, 4 divers and 2 tenders were about to perform a procedure they'd done hundreds of times before. It required 5 steps. They completed 2. The diving bell had just returned from a dive. Inside it, Bjørn Giæver Bergersen, 29, Norwegian, and Truls Hellevik, 34, also Norwegian. They climbed out of the bell through the trunk and into Chamber 1, leaving wet equipment behind in the passage. Already resting in the connected Chamber 2 were Edwin Arthur Coward, 35, British, and Roy P. Lucas, 38, also British. They'd been under pressure together. 9 atmospheres, the equivalent of 80 meters of seawater, pressing in on every surface of every cell. Outside the pressurized system, on deck in 1 atmosphere, normal air, were 2 dive tenders. William Cramond, 32, British, and Martin Saunders. The tenders managed the mechanical systems, the clamps, the connections, the procedure. And the procedure was this. Step 1. Close the bell door. Completed. Step 2. Slightly increase bell pressure to seal the door against its frame. Completed. Step 3. Close the chamber door between Chamber 1 and the trunk. Hellevik was in the process of doing this. He was standing at the inner doorway, working the hatch. Step 4. Verify both doors sealed. Step 5. Release the clamp holding the trunk sealed to the chamber system so the bell could be disconnected. But Step 4 never happened. and step 5 didn't wait. Before Hellevik had finished closing the chamber 1 door, before the trunk was sealed off from the pressurized chambers, the clamp was opened. The clamp holding the trunk connected. The clamp that was the only thing standing between 9 atmospheres and 1. Whether William Crammond opened it on his own initiative, on an order, or through miscommunication, no one will ever know. The investigation would later conclude it was his action. He would not be alive to explain it. The trunk was now open to the North Sea air, and behind it 9 atmospheres of pressure held in check by nothing. Advisory: the following section contains clinical forensic description of death by explosive decompression. Air at 9 atmospheres does not escape. It detonates. Both chambers depressurize to 1 atmosphere in a fraction of a second. The air blasted outward through the trunk with tremendous force. The diving bell was blown clear of the chamber system, still connected by nothing, launched across the deck. It struck William Crammond. He died on impact. Martin Saunders was thrown and critically injured. Inside, Truls Hellevik was standing at the inner door between chamber 1 and the trunk. The door he had been closing. The pressure wave hit from behind. The door, a center-hinged butterfly valve design, was rotated too far by the blast. Its rim lodged against the opening, and the result was a crescent-shaped gap, 60 centimeters across, 24 inches. Through that gap, Hellevik's body was forced by the full differential, 9 atmospheres to 1. The forensic pathologists who later published the case, Geertsen, Sandstad, Settekleiv and their colleagues, in the American Journal of Forensic Medicine and Pathology, 1988, described it in clinical terms. Hellevik's thoracoabdominal cavity was bisected. All internal organs of his chest and abdomen were expelled, with the exception of the trachea and a section of small intestine. Organ fragments were recovered from the deck. One fragment was found 10 meters vertically above the exterior pressure door. The forensic paper that documents this, published 5 years later, 8 pages, dry academic prose, remains one of the most widely cited case studies in decompression pathology. The authors were not sensational, they were precise. And that precision is what makes it so difficult to read, because the language is calm and the facts are not. Hellevik's death was violent and instantaneous, but the other 3 divers, Coward, Lucas, Bergerson, did not get blown apart. They died where they were. The investigation diagrams showed them in their positions. They had not moved. Death was functionally instant. The question the pathologists had to answer was, why? The autopsies revealed it. And in some ways, it was worse. The most conspicuous finding, the phrase the paper uses, the most conspicuous finding, was large amounts of fat in the large arteries, veins, and cardiac chambers. Fat was found intravascularly throughout their organs, especially the liver. This was not embolic fat. It had not traveled there through the bloodstream from some injury. The pathologists determined it had precipitated in place, dropped out of solution, in situ. Here is what happened at the molecular level. At 9 atmospheres, gases dissolve into blood at concentrations far beyond what surface pressure can hold. When the pressure vanished in a fraction of a second, those dissolved gases boiled out of the blood, violently, instantly. The boiling denatured the lipoprotein complexes in the blood plasma. The lipids, the fats that are normally held in solution by those proteins, became insoluble. They solidified, precipitated, like wax hardening in cold water. Their blood stopped being blood. Their circulation didn't slow. It ceased. In a fraction of a second, the medium that carries life through the human body turned to something that could not move. 5 men dead. And the question nobody wanted to answer was the simplest one of all. Why was the clamp able to open in the first place? The Byford Dolphin's diving system was built in 1975. By 1983, it was obsolete. It lacked fail-safe hatches. It lacked outboard pressure gauges, meaning the tenders on the outside had no independent way to verify whether the system was still pressurized before disconnecting. And critically, fatally, it lacked an interlocking mechanism, a mechanical or electronic lock that would physically prevent the clamp from being opened while the trunk was still under pressure. That technology existed. That rule existed. Norske Veritas, the Norwegian classification society responsible for certifying offshore equipment, had already issued a requirement for interlocking mechanisms on diving systems. Before the accident, the equipment on the Byford Dolphin did not have one, and it gets worse. The diving contractor was Comex, a French company. According to later reporting in the Norwegian newspaper Dagbladet and statements from NOPEF, the Norwegian Oil Workers Union, Comex had requested dispensations from the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, waivers for the interlocking mechanism, for outboard gauges, for safe communication systems, equipment that would have made it physically impossible for a clamp to open while 4 men breathed pressurized helium on the other side. The dispensations were granted. The investigation committee concluded that William Crammond, the dive tender, caused the accident by opening the clamp prematurely. William Crammond was dead, killed when the diving bell struck him. He could not testify. He could not explain whether he acted on an order, whether there was a miscommunication through a megaphone on a noisy rig at 4 in the morning after more than 12 hours of work, whether he even knew the trunk was still pressurized on a system that had no outboard gauge to tell him. A dead man was assigned the blame for a failure that a simple mechanical interlock would have prevented. Former crew members and the Oil Workers Union alleged that the investigation had omitted, their words, irresponsible dispensations on vital equipment. That the real cause was not one man's error, but a systemic failure enabled by regulatory waivers. That the investigation protected the industry, not the workers. And then, silence. The families of Edwin Coward, Roy Lucas, Bjørn Bergersen, Truls Hellevik, and William Crammond waited. For accountability, for acknowledgement, for compensation. They waited 26 years. It was not until 2009 that the Norwegian government provided compensation to the families. 26 years after the morning the clamp opened. In 2008, Claire Lucas, the daughter of Roy Lucas, the 38-year-old British diver who died in Chamber 2 with fat solidifying in his arteries, said this publicly: "I would go so far as to say that the Norwegian government murdered my father because they knew that they were diving with an unsafe decompression chamber." The Byford Dolphin kept drilling. In 2002, another worker died on the same rig. It eventually lost its contract with Statoil, and in 2019, 36 years after the accident, the Byford Dolphin was towed to Aliyar, Turkey. Beached, cut apart for scrap. The same rig that had cut apart 5 men was itself taken to pieces on a foreign shore. This wasn't a freak accident. The safety equipment existed. The rules existed. The requirement had already been written. What happened on November 5, 1983 was not a failure of physics, or even of one exhausted man at 4 in the morning. It was a failure of the decision, made somewhere by someone in an office, that the rules could be waived, that the interlock wasn't necessary, that 9 atmospheres could be held back by procedure alone. 5 men trusted that system with their lives. Their families trusted it for 26 years after. Edwin Coward, Roy Lucas, Bjørn Bergersen, Truls Hellevik, William Crammond. If this one kept you up tonight, good. That was the point. Subscribe and hit the bell so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend. But maybe don't tell them it's all real until after they've finished. Subscribers get this episode ad-free, plus a bonus ending you won't hear anywhere else, including the full story of the North Sea Divers Alliance and the 26-year fight that Claire Lucas led for her father. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.